Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6.9 Season 21 Monk build guide. Now this is a guide for the Justice Monk, which uses Tempest Rush and the Patterns of Justice set. It's not a new build, it was introduced 2 seasons ago, but I've not had a chance to make a guide for it yet. And it is one of the most powerful monk builds in the game. This guide should also apply for future seasons, just always be sure to check the video description to see if any update has happened to the build. In this video, we're going to go over the gear, the skills, and the playstyle that you'll want to rock this build. And it all begins with the Patterns of Justice set. For the 2-piece bonus, Sweeping Wind gains the effect of every rune, and move speed is increased by 5% for each stack of Sweeping Wind. For the 4-piece, Attacking with Tempest Rush reduces your damage taken by 50% and increases Spirit Generation by 50%. And the 6-piece, Hitting with Tempest Rush while Sweeping Wind is active increases the size of Sweeping Wind and also increases all damage dealt by 15,000%. So Sweeping Wind is something we'll want to maintain all the time, but we don't actually care about the damage of Sweeping Wind. It is Tempest Rush that will be our damage dealer here. Sweeping Wind will activate our buffs, our set, but Tempest Rush is both our vehicle, what we're using to travel around, and our damage dealer. And so we're going to work in some supporting items in the form of the Wan Kim Lao fist weapon. Hitting with Tempest Rush will activate Cyclone Strike, and both skills deal 600% increased damage. This is a huge multiplier to Tempest Rush. We'll also want the Caesar's Memento Bracers. Enemies take 800% increased damage from your Tempest Rush for 5 seconds after you hit them with a blind, freeze, or stun. Now this is a situational buff, but we're going to want to make sure that we take this enormous damage multiplier and apply it at the right time to maximize our damage. In our cube, we're going to need the Balance Daybow. The damage of Tempest Rush is increased by a bunch, and when your Tempest Rush hits 3 or fewer enemies, it gains 100% crit chance. This is going to help out versus single target. So those are our most relevant Tempest Rush related items, but we're going to be using some other supporting gear as well. We're going to work in a Flavor of Time amulet. This doubles the duration of pylon effects, just a great buff to have while doing greater rifts. It's not mandatory to the build, so if you have a really rotten Flavor of Time, you're probably better off with a perfect other amulet. We're going to want a Convention of Elements, and we will be working with damage windows. So, with a convention, you gain up to 200% increased damage to a single element for 4 seconds, and this rotates through the monk's elements. This is a cold build, and we're going to want to unleash our built-up damage in our cold window. Timing the window with this build will be very important. We'll also want an Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. Reduce the remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second when you hit with a resource spending attack. This build will have us going around with Tempest Rush, which is spending resource, so that's going to be triggering our Orots a lot here, and this is going to help us maintain a lot of uptime on our Epiphany. Now we're also going to work in a Ring of Royal Grandeur. This reduces the number of items needed for set bonuses by 1. You cannot get a Ring of Royal Grandeur from Kadala or from upgrading items. You're going to want to get it by farming Act 1 bounties. Act 4 bounties can also have it, but your best odds are doing Act 1 bounties and opening that bounty bag. We're also going to work in a Mantle of Channeling. While channeling Tempest Rush, you deal more damage and you take less damage, and we're going to be always channeling Tempest Rush. And then we're working in the Captain Crimson set. 2 pieces, the belt and then either the pants or the boots. Captain Crimson's gives us some life per second, but more importantly, 20% cooldown, 20% resource cost reduction, both of which will be very helpful to us. But then also damage dealt is increased by your percentage of cooldown reduction, and we're going to be stacking a ton of cooldown. And also damage taken is reduced by your percentage of resource cost reduction. Then lastly, our other item here will be an Azarath, simply because it gives us a cold damage multiplier. It also gives us a 25% chance to freeze on hit, which will trigger our Caesar's Memento. But again, the Azarath is not critical here. You could instead go with a Pig Sticker Dagger. This would be for purposes of using it as a stat stick. You can have 1 additional affix on a Pig Sticker, so you can stack more useful primary affixes. If you're doing speedruns, you could also go with a Vengeful Wind. this increases the max stack count of Sweeping Wind by 10. And remember, thanks to the Patterns of Justice, our move speed is increased by 5% for each stack of Sweeping Wind. But for Greater Rift, pushing a Vengeful Wind will not really be helpful when we want to be squeezing out more damage. Now, if you want to be a bit more defensive, another option is, instead of cubing the Mantle of Channeling, you can cube Stone Gauntlets. These are a big defensive buff, and as long as we are in Epiphany, we're not going to suffer the negative effect of the Stone Gauntlets. With the Stone Gauntlets, the more you get hit, the more your defenses rise, but you also move slower. If you're in Epiphany, however, you're not being affected by that. As for your legendary gems, we're going to want a Bane of the Trapped. We deal more damage to crowd-controlled enemies. This synergizes very well with the playstyle we're going to seek. We're going to get a Taeguk, the channeling gem, more damage and more defense while we're channeling. And for pushing the highest Greater Rifts, a Bane of the Stricken. Otherwise, if you're doing faster content, go for a Bane of the Powerful. As long as the Bane of the Powerful buff is not timing out, you're generally better suited with the Bane of the Powerful. As for regular gems, in our weapons, emeralds for crit damage, in our helm, diamond for cooldown, and then in our chest and pants, if you want more toughness, diamonds. If you want more damage, emeralds for dex. Now we're going to go over exactly what we want on every piece of gear, but first let's take a look at the skills and talk about playstyle. So the star of the show here is Tempest Rush. This is the Rafflecopter skill. You twirl your Dabo around, spinning through enemies, and with the Flurry rune, after you stop channeling Tempest Rush, you cause an icy blast to all enemies within 15 yards, which isn't very far. The damage of the explosion increases by 90% weapon damage as cold while channeling. So because of this, we want to be channeling to build up the damage and then release that damage buildup during the appropriate timing window, the Convention of Elements. If you're doing speed content, if things are dying so easily that you don't even have to worry about stopping your channel, then you can go with Tailwind. This will give you more move speed, great for speed runs. We're going to want Sweeping Wind. The rune doesn't matter because we're getting all effects. You pop Sweeping Wind, the wind appears around you. Then as you land crits, you build up stacks of Sweeping Wind. We're going to top out at 3 stacks. What Master of the Wind does is freeze enemies. This is going to help with our Caesar's Memento. Bladestorm is more damage and thus useless because Sweeping Wind, the damage of this skill is going to pale in comparison to our Tempest Rush. Firestorm will increase the radius of Sweeping Wind, but our set bonus is already increasing its size. Inner Storm is very useful to us, however. As long as we have 3 or more stacks, we're going to get Spirit Generation. And then Cyclone, again, not beneficial to us. So again, be sure that you always have Sweeping Wind active anytime you're going to be engaging enemies. If you don't have 3 stacks of Sweeping Wind, you are not being the best you that you can be. Next, a very important skill here, Blinding Flash Faith in the Light. Create a flash of light that blinds all enemies within 20 yards for 3 seconds. You're going to deal more damage for 3 seconds after using this, and this is going to trigger our Caesar's Memento. This is what we have control over. This is the hard CC, the hard crowd control that we're able to control, that we have agency over to trigger our Caesar's Memento. And this is what's going to finish up our rotation. So, you Tempest Rush around, gathering up a density of enemies, then as you get into your cold damage window on the Convention of Elements, you pop Blinding Flash, activating Caesars. That's also going to automatically cancel your Tempest Rush channel, therefore releasing all the built up damage. So while you can actually just release Tempest Rush in order to cancel it, you can also cancel it by tapping Blinding Flash without releasing Tempest Rush. Next, we're going to want Epiphany Desert Shroud, Monk staple. We want as much uptime on this as possible. This gives us a huge buff to our Spirit Generation and gives us 50% damage reduction. We're going to want Mantra of Salvation Agility. Passively, this gives us more defense. Actively, it gives us even more defense. So if you feel damage spikes coming in, pop your mantra in anticipation. And if things are really scary, Serenity. Serenity gives us total invulnerability, 4 seconds with the Ascension rune on a 16-second cooldown. Again though, we're stacking a bunch of cooldown and we have an Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. As for our passives, we're gonna get Seize the Initiative. Dealing damage to enemies above 75% life increases your attack speed by 30% for 4 seconds. so this gives us a nice damage buff at the start of an engagement. Momentum, moving 25 yards increases your damage by 20% for 6 seconds. We're always moving around with Tempest Rush. So as you're actually moving around, make sure that you're going to be constantly benefiting from momentum. But you also have to be careful. Depending on how you move, you could potentially accidentally cancel your Tempest Rush. So you're going to have to get a feel for it. You're going to learn to notice the right pattern, the right groove to go with your movements. You're going to become a master of Jeet Kune Do here. As the great Bruce Lee says, be water, my friend. Basically what happens is, it's not that it's actually stopping the Tempest Rush, but the flurry stacks will drop, and it appears that this happens when you move your mouse over your character. So if you're going literally back and forth and your cursor is moving over your character, that can cause your stacks to drop. I'm not sure if they fixed this bug yet, but basically just try to move in smoother circular motions. Wax on, wax off. We need Beacon of Etar for that 20% cooldown reduction, and then Relentless Assault, you deal 20% more damage to enemies that are blind, frozen, or stunned, which again, when releasing our big damage spike, this will apply. Now you'll notice that we have no defensive passives here. So if you are to sacrifice something to gain near-death experience, I would go with Seize the Initiative. If you want to take things even further and also get Harmony for extra defense, I would drop Momentum for that. Now, as for exactly what we want on every piece of gear, on our shoulders, Dex, All Resistor Vitality, cooldown, area damage. For our helm, Dex, Tempest Rush damage, crit chance. For our amulet, cold damage, crit chance, crit damage, and if it's a Flavor of Time, cooldown reduction. For our gloves, crit, cooldown, area damage. For our chest, Dex, Vitality, and another defensive stat like reduced damage from elites. For our bracers, cold, Dex, Vitality, crit. For our belt, Dex, Vitality, all resist, life. For our pants, Dex, Vitality, all resist. For our boots, Dex, Vitality, all resist, Tempest Rush damage. Now note, if you are getting the Harmony passive, instead of all resist, you want to get secondary resistances and stack a different defensive stat on your gear. For your convention of elements, crit chance, crit damage, area damage. For your Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, attack speed, crit chance, cooldown. For your weapons, get cooldown on both, get area damage on both, and then if you have the extra stat, either Dex or raw damage. As for our Paragon Points, you want to get your total move speed up to 25%, factoring in what may be on gear, then dump everything into Dex. If you really need toughness, you can move some into Vitality. For offense, cooldown first, then crit chance and crit damage, maintaining a 1-to-10 ratio, factoring in what's on your gear, then attack speed. For defense, all resist, life, armor, life regen, and for utility, resource cost reduction, area damage, life per hit, and gold find. And that's gonna wrap up this video. But do be sure to check out our other videos. We got guides on a bunch of different builds. We have a speed leveling guide. We have a video on the best builds of Season 21. Be sure to check those all out. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.